When my older brother visits, he takes anything he wants and says I have to share. He grabbed my refrigerator today and demanded payment for delivery. For him, I therefore created a sticky trap containing bait. My name is Emily, and I am 29 years old. My home was purchased 10 months ago. Every last tile, fixture, creaky drawer, and every inch of it belongs to me. I put in so much effort to earn it that the memory of those years hurts my bones. I rented small apartments with paper-thin walls for almost 10 years, living in close quarters with housemates who never washed their dishes or left passive-aggressive comments on the refrigerator. I missed out on things that people my age tend to take for granted, like concerts, trips, new clothes, takeout, and birthday presents. To save enough for a down payment, I sacrificed a lot. I was adamant about owning something, and I sobbed when I eventually signed those documents and held the keys. Not that the house was large or elegant. It's not. However, it was all mine because it was mine. Sadly, that memo was overlooked by another person. Kyle, my 34-year-old older brother, has always felt that he is owed something by the world. He has never truly put in a lot of effort to achieve anything. He would steal my belongings as a child, including my clothes, headphones, and even cash from my wallet. He's your older brother. You should share with him. Our mother would just shrug, adding, that one sentence was practically tattooed onto my childhood. I still recall how she would sigh as if I were being dramatic, and how Kyle would smirk from behind her as if he knew I would never win. That attitude never changed, if anything, and now Kyle treats my house as if it were some sort of communal storage unit, coming and going as he pleases. It started out small, like him taking a tool from the shed or borrowing my leaf blower, but it got out of hand. One day I came home to discover my blender gone, and a few weeks later a side table I kept by the door was gone. I called Kyle to ask if he had it, and he simply laughed and said, "You never used it. It was all right because of that. We're family. You don't need all this stuff." As if being related gives him the right to pillage my life like a garage sale. He once took my lawnmower and kept it for 3 months. When I asked for it back, he said it made more sense for him to have it since I only have a tiny patch of grass and he has a whole yard. His reasoning was that my belongings didn't really belong to me if he thought he had a better use for them. I changed the locks after that. He somehow obtained a copy from our mom. The cycle has become unending. I was exhausted and sweaty after a long day of back-to-back meetings, and I was dreaming about leftovers and cold water when I came home to find my refrigerator gone. I stood in stunned silence in the kitchen, staring at the gaping hole where it used to be, and I opened the cabinets, thinking maybe I was in some sort of dissociative fog. But no, the refrigerator was gone. The floor had small scuff marks where it had been dragged away, and when I checked my Ring camera in a panic, I saw footage of Kyle pulling up with 2 of his friends, all of them smiling foolishly. I felt lightheaded, so they went straight into my house because, of course, he still had a key, unplugged the refrigerator, lifted it like they'd done it 100 times, and hauled it out. They even had the audacity to wrap it in moving blankets as if they were doing me a favor. I called him but got no response, so I texted but got no response, and then a Venmo notification appeared, and Kyle asked for $75. Note the delivery fee. I sat there, my heart pounding in my ears, my jaw so clenched that I thought my teeth would break. This man, this leech, this overgrown child who thinks the world is his for the taking, didn't just take my stuff. He demanded payment. I had spent years biting my tongue, playing nice, being the mature one, trying to keep the peace in a family that never cared about balance. But now there was nothing left to preserve. He had crossed a line so big and bold that I could practically see it burning in front of me. He didn't respect me. He didn't even see me as a person with boundaries or autonomy, but rather as a resource, a place to plunder. He thought I would yell, send angry texts, and vent to our mother, who would say, "Just let it go. Your brother is M." However, I didn't intend to yell. No, I began planning how I was going to discipline him. After Kyle stole my refrigerator and demanded a delivery fee like some 2-bit Craigslist thief, I didn't yell, I didn't call my mom, and I didn't even block him. Instead, I let silence settle like dust because silence makes people nervous, especially those who are used to being confronted. Kyle thrives on reaction, so this time I gave him none. I started with an Instagram story, nothing too ostentatious, just casual enough to appear as though I was living my best life, but subtle enough to feel genuine. A soft glow filter, a neatly placed corner of my living room, and, in the middle of it all, a huge, sleek-looking flat-screen television on my media stand. The TV was actually an old, gutted screen that I picked up from a man on Craigslist who was excited to get it off his porch. I carefully heat-shrunk it in place to give it that brand-new shine, and I made sure the lighting was just right so you couldn't tell the screen was fake. No glow, no cords, nothing. But the real trick was underneath it. I had gone to the hardware store earlier in the week and picked up a shallow plastic tray thin enough to slide under the base of the stand. I captioned it, "Finally treated myself," and it was bait. I wired a cheap pressure trigger underneath the fake TV to a simple mechanism I found online. A spring-loaded plate that would shoot upward the moment the weight was lifted, and I loaded the tray with a thick mixture of honey, fine glitter, and just enough blue dye to stain. Not permanently, but long enough, because I didn't want to ruin his life, but I wanted to mark it. I waited, even posting a follow-up story that showed me at work, sipping coffee and scrolling on my laptop at the coziest little cafe, but I was actually at home, curled up in bed with popcorn, watching my Ring camera feed. He arrived? Of course he did. Kyle's ego won't let him down when faced with a challenge, especially one that smells of luxury and victory all at once. My stomach churned with anticipation as he pulled up, strutting up the stairs like he owned the place. No knocking, no hesitation. Just a key in the lock, still using the spare he swiped from Mom months ago, and then he was inside. I swear I saw his face light up through the grainy Ring lens as he looked around, clocking every object in the room like a vulture scanning for movement. And then he marched right over, bent at the knees like some warehouse worker on a time drill, and lifted. The moment the weight changed, the trap exploded, sending a shower of glitter up into his face, catching in his beard, and clinging to his lashes. I kept the footage. I didn't post it. Not yet. I want to be strategic. The honey splashed across his arms and chest in thick globs, sticking to his shirt and hands. The blue dye streaked across his left side, streaking down like a watercolor nightmare. He stumbled back, lost his footing on the slippery floor, and slipped with a hard thud. The sound echoed faintly through the Ring mic. He groaned, cursed, and flailed, still trying to hold on to the useless, gutted TV frame. I watched as he staggered to his feet, sticky and glittering like some sort of cursed craft project, and stormed out without even bothering to wipe anything down. He didn't slam the door. He didn't yell. He simply left, hunched over and furious. Unless he escalates, I don't need to publicly humiliate him, but I did save the video in a safe folder called Plan B. With Kyle, you never know. He hasn't texted me at all, not even to demand that I clean the trap, change his shirt, or make some flimsy excuse. His silence is almost unnerving. It indicates that he's either deeply embarrassed or quietly stewing, working on his next play. Kyle never lets things go, but this time, neither do I. I left the glitter on the floor for an extra day because I wanted to remind myself what victory looked like. He had not texted me, but he hasn't finished. I had a feeling Kyle wasn't going to let the glitter honey trap go unanswered because his pride was too high and his entitlement too ingrained in his identity. He hadn't texted, called, or tried anything for nearly a week, and for most people, that might have felt like a resolution. But for Kyle, silence was just the inhale before the tantrum. Sure enough, he returned, but this time he wasn't alone. I was at home rearranging some kitchen shelves and listening to a true crime podcast when I heard the knock. Not a courteous tap, but the kind that shakes the frame of your door and carries with it an unspoken demand, and I felt my stomach tighten. It was my mother, who stood there like a fury, dressed in a cardigan set and polyester slacks, her mouth already twisted in judgment, with Kyle standing behind her, arms crossed, looking every bit the victim, even though he still had a few strands of hair. If it weren't so annoying, it would have been funny, but I opened the door after briefly hovering my hand over the lock. Kyle, who had always known how to use our mother's guilt as a weapon, followed in smug confidence, likely believing that bringing her would tip the balance of power in his favor. She rushed in, brushing past me as if she owned the deed to the house, and raised her voice, accusing me of humiliating her son and of being spiteful, dramatic, and selfish. "What is the matter with you?" She threw up her arms and said, "You don't get to be selfish with family." I stood composed and asked them both to leave, without yelling or retaliating, as if I had broken into my own house and demanded payment afterwards. Naturally, she ignored me, as if that sentence gave her the moral high ground to cross my boundaries in my own house. Her voice reverberated throughout the living room as she strode forward, her eyes already searching for evidence that I was wrong, but trap number 2 was waiting. In the middle of the coffee table was a small, sealed jewelry box, just big enough to be alluring and vague enough to set off Kyle's instincts. I had made it especially for this kind of situation, so I didn't bother concealing it or even pretending to protect it. It was bait, obvious, and placed with surgical precision. Kyle took the bait like a fish that never learns, reaching for the box, his fingers grazing the lid. And as soon as he touched it, a hidden Bluetooth speaker inside clicked to life. All of his body flinched as a clear, sharp, pre-recorded message that said, "Kyle, if you're hearing this, you're stealing again," began to play. At the same time, a small pressurized canister inside the box released a targeted spray straight into the air. It was a scent I had imported especially for this moment. It was harmless, but it was skunk scent concentrate, the kind that's used to train hunting dogs for worst-case situations. It was cloying, sharp, and completely unavoidable. Kyle instantly reeled back, his face twisted as the first wave hit him. He gagged hard, stumbled, his elbow caught the side of the table, and he fell, taking a decorative bowl with him. The crash reverberated, then the wet sound of him retching into his own lap. The smell was already permeating the room in waves of misery, and my mother began to shriek, not yell, scream. She put a sleeve to her nose and staggered backward, almost tripping over Kyle's sprawled legs. The smell hit her harder than it hit him, but she started coughing violently, her eyes watering, her entire composure crumbling under the invisible, foul fog that was now hanging in the air. I didn't say anything. I just walked over calm and steady and opened the front door wide, and I watched them flail in chaos, coughing and gagging, their plan falling apart faster than they could comprehend. My mother once locked eyes with me, and I believe she finally noticed. She didn't argue or reprimand. Instead, she grabbed Kyle's arm and yanked him toward the door. He was barely upright, his skin turning pale as he stumbled out the door and collapsed to his knees in the front bushes, heaving again, his shirt soaked, not from the spray, but from the sweat and nausea that hit him full force. I didn't slam the door after them. I didn't raise my voice once, and I let the silence speak for itself. They left in silence, Kyle dry heaving in the bushes. I knew it was a staged intervention under the guise of family diplomacy, a last attempt to brush it all under the rug and pretend Kyle hadn't weaponized their bias and our family dynamic for years. I accepted, but not because I wanted peace, but because I wanted proof. I wanted them to sit there and see it all in the light of day, not filtered through tears or excuses or mom's selective memory. The drive there was quiet, too quiet. This morning began with a text from my dad. The message was brief, measured, and not emotionally charged like the ones from my mother. My hands were steady, but my mind was focused, already practicing how I'd lay it all out. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. The house smelled like cinnamon candles and stale tension, the same cloying scent Mom always lit when she wanted to make things feel homey, as if wax and spice could hide dysfunction. When I arrived, Kyle was already seated at the table, his arms crossed, and his expression said a smug mix of pity and disdain, as if he was the one doing me a favor by being there. My mother hovered nearby, her arms folded tightly across her chest, wearing the kind of grimace that had haunted every punishment I ever received as a child, avoiding eye contact, meaning she was locked into defense mode. I didn't respond. Not yet. Dad nodded as he sat down, his shoulders heavy with what appeared to be shame and years of worn-out neutrality. At first, no one spoke. Kyle broke the silence, letting out a sigh as if the entire world had been dropped on his poor, innocent shoulders and launching into his act. He said I had set him up, that I had planned everything to make him look like a thief, that I was obsessed with making him look like a thief, that my traps were planned attacks, and that I was mentally ill for fabricating situations to ruin his life. She described me as the resentful little sister who never recovered from playing second fiddle to her golden boy, and her voice trembled not with sadness, but with the desperate panic of someone who can see the walls closing in and has no idea how to stop them. She claimed that Kyle was merely attempting to assist by taking things I obviously wasn't using, and that I was making a big deal out of nothing by involving the police. I nearly laughed, but I didn't come to react, so I waited until they had finished talking, and then I took out the folder from my bag. It was neatly labeled, printed, and organized, a weapon made of truth. I put the first set of papers in front of them, stills from my Ring camera, all of them clean and time-stamped. The first one showed Kyle taking out my fridge with 2 friends and a dolly. The second showed him lifting the fake TV. His face lit with greed a second before the glitter and honey explosion. And the third, my favorite, showed him mid-reach for the jewelry bait box, seconds before the skunk spray detonated and sent him sprawling backward. His face, twisted in confusion and dread, was forever frozen in that moment. I didn't have to say anything because the pictures spoke louder than I ever could. I watched Kyle's face change from defiant to flushed, squinting as if he was looking for a flaw, a way out. Then I put down the next stack of police reports, one for theft and one for harassment, both filled out in detail and both explicitly naming Kyle. I explained that although the police hadn't filed charges yet, I had spoken to an officer who told me that if there was even one more incident, they would take it to the next level. I told them that the officer had been professional and attentive and had advised me to document everything, which I had. Every screenshot, every message, every camera angle. Kyle began tapping his fingers against the table, the rhythm irregular and nervous. He looked at his mother, but she was no longer standing up for him. She seemed smaller and paler now, as if the truth had started to shrink her world. Then I placed the last page of the small claims court filing on the table and informed them that I had filed a lawsuit against Kyle for the full cost of the stolen refrigerator, as well as the costs of cleaning and repairing the glitter and honey trap, and that I had receipts for the skunk spray cleanup. I also included a claim for emotional distress, not exaggerated, but reasonable, enough to hurt, enough to make it real. Kyle's face flushed so quickly that it appeared as though a switch had been flipped, and his mouth moved as if he wanted to argue, to call it unfair, but nothing came out, just air. His body tensed, frozen in the position of someone who had never, in his life, had to deal with the fallout from his family. Mom's mouth fell open, stunned, and unable to speak. For once, she had nothing. The mythology she had spent years creating, the fantasy in which Kyle was endearing and innocent, and I was resentful and dramatic, was falling apart before her eyes, and she looked at my dad as if pleading with him to intervene. For the first time in a long, long time, he did. My dad turned to Kyle and asked him what was wrong with him, his voice not angry but tired and disappointed, like a man who had just realized he had been watching the wrong fire burn for decades. He then turned to me, looked me in the eyes, and apologized, saying that he should have said something years ago, that he had allowed Kyle to take too much, too often, and left me to handle the fallout alone. Kyle sat motionless, his arms tense, his fists clenched, staring at the pictures, the reports, and the lawsuit, as if trying to mentally erase them from existence. Then, barely above a whisper, he muttered something about getting a lawyer, but we both know he can't afford one. He didn't try to make it better, he just acknowledged it, and that in its own way was enough. Mom stood up suddenly, and without saying anything, she turned and left, the cinnamon candle in her hand acting as a retreat flag. The court date came, and went with less fanfare than I had anticipated, and Kyle didn't even bother showing up. No calls, no attempts to negotiate, no surprise entrance in court with some half-baked defense, just absence. He either forgot, didn't care, or was too embarrassed to face the fallout of everything he'd done. It worked in my favor. 2 months have passed since I laid everything out on my parents' kitchen table. The footage, the reports, the court filing. And there has been no drama, no yelling, and no more guilt trips from Mom, which felt like a small miracle in and of itself. The police reports, the stills from the Ring footage, the written testimony I had submitted along with receipts and itemized costs, and the stills from the Ring footage. It was all there. It wasn't just a claim. It was a narrative that was well supported and meticulously backed by evidence. The decision was made immediately, and I received full compensation for the stolen refrigerator, which I had valued at market value with proof of the original purchase. I was reimbursed for the professional cleaning services I had to pay for following the glitter honey incident. The skunk spray disaster was also taken into account, along with a small sum for emotional distress and disturbance of peace. Nothing extravagant, just enough to make a statement. The best part, though, was that the judge issued a restraining order. Kyle was now legally required to stay at least 100 feet away from my house for a full year. There were no exceptions or loopholes, and if he even stepped foot on my property, he would be arrested for trespassing. Finally, something with teeth, something enforceable. Seeing the system work for once, not flawlessly, but effectively, was a strange sort of relief. I took the victory and put it back into myself, replacing the refrigerator with a newer, better model with double doors and a built-in ice maker. The kind of refrigerator I used to linger over in appliance stores with silent longing. I wanted Kyle and anyone like him to know that this house wasn't just protected but fortified. I put up signs, not because they were necessary, but because they added a layer of psychological weight. No more surprise visits, no more stolen items, and no more guilt-ridden voicemails from my mother. It feels like a full-circle moment every time I open it now. A motion-triggered sprinkler system was installed around the front and side of my house. It's a harmless deterrent, but it works well at night. According to what I've heard, Kyle moved in with a friend of his from high school, the type of guy who always has half a plan and no real job. It lasted maybe a week before Kyle was kicked out, and it seems like he borrowed the guy's laptop without asking and tried to pawn it. Classic. The same patterns, recycled and rotting. No accountability, no remorse, just another burned bridge in a long line of them. Since then, he's been couch surfing, according to some mutual acquaintances, blaming me for everything, saying that I ruined his life, which honestly made me laugh aloud. I never wanted a war. I never wanted things to get out of hand. But there comes a time when being the bigger person is just code for being a doormat. Kyle tested every boundary I had. And to be fair, he was right for years. I let him get away with it, hoping that he would grow out of it or that our family would finally see it for what it was. But he never did. And they never did until they were forced to. So, yeah, my brother believed that he could just keep entering my personal space in my life and helping himself to whatever he wanted, believing that being family meant never having to ask, never having to apologize, and most definitely never having to face consequences. I hope he learns a lesson from this.